I moved on to Life of Pi by Yann Martel. I had bought this book I think 2 or 3 years ago, and I thought that it would be the perfect vacation read. I wasn't really expecting much in the form of depth by it. Life of Pi is about a young boy who he grows up in a zoo. His family owns a zoo, and he is a Hindu, a Christian and a Muslim, because he's really interested in faith and religion, and he basically decides to get all of the religions, not be constrained by just one. So the first 100 pages is about his religion and his going to school and zoo management, and there's a lot of side notes that are very fact heavy and that feel like they have no direct purpose for the book, and I'm not sure that they actually do serve that big of a purpose for the storyline of the boat. However, I wasn't too bummed out about it because I actually really enjoyed the fact parts of it. I thought that they were really interesting as nonfiction, so I'm not sure how accurate they are, but I feel like they probably are because they are so fact, almost objectively written. He and his family decide to move to Canada, and during this boat trip that they go on to Canada, the boat sinks and he is the only survivor of it. He ends up being alone with a tiger eventually, and this book is mostly about his surviving on this lifeboat with the tiger for 6 months. It is a very epic type story, survival story, and with that there is some elements of sort of your inspirational story of survival and how he pulls through, not just in the physical parts, but in keeping it together mentally. I thought that this book was really interesting. At parts I found it to be slightly dull because it is monotonous, and those parts were really... They were written in a very detached style, which probably served a purpose for the story, but I was not really gelling with them. I felt like it made the book duller. So I wasn't in love with all of the parts, and there's quite a lot of parts about the killing of animals, and if I hadn't brought this book to my vacation, I probably wouldn't have finished this book because of those parts. But those things aside, I did feel like the book itself was really entertaining a lot of the time. It was interesting, it pulled me through, so that was basically how I felt about most of the book. Then I read The ABC Murders by Agatha Christie. This is again one of the Hercule Poirot books. I've read quite a few Agatha Christie books actually this year already, and it's been a lot of fun. This book is a book about a serial killer. The thing that makes this different is that it takes place in different parts of the country. The murders take place in sort of a county of England that starts with the first letter of the alphabet, and someone in that county whose name starts with this first letter of the alphabet, and then he continues on through the alphabet. Poirot goes to investigate. He gets a letter from the murderer before they happen, and the book itself is basically a cat-mouse chase through England, and Poirot and Hastings traveling together and trying to solve the mystery. And what I really liked about this book is that because the murderer is quite far away, he is unknown, even though he is always a presence in the book through the letters that he sends and through the killings. The main cast of the book is not suspects, but rather victims of the murderers or the associates of the victims, and Poirot and Hastings and the police, obviously. So that was really interesting, and a very different feel to the book compared to the other Christies that I've read. And again, I really love Hastings and Poirot's relationship. He often complains about Poirot's style of telling, of doing things and of not doing things. I really like the relationship, and I feel like it's very ironically done. It's a really fun Poirot mystery with some different ingredients. The next book I finished was actually The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is obviously by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and it is a short story collection of a lot of different Holmes and Watson mysteries and crimes. So I have actually read this book before. I reread this and actually listened to it as an audiobook, narrated by Stephen Fry. This audiobook is fantastic. If you haven't listened to the audiobooks of Sherlock Holmes by Stephen Fry, then you're missing out, because he is a fantastic narrator. He just completely captures both Sherlock Holmes and Watson and all of the characters that take place in this book, which is kind of a lot because it is a short story collection. So it was just a fantastic audiobook experience. I also feel like in general this is a really great Sherlock Holmes book. I think it would probably be a really good place to start with Sherlock Holmes, because you get a lot of different sides to his character. You see Watson constantly because he's obviously narrating the stories, and they are very iconic. One of them is the Scandal of Bohemia, A Scandal in Bohemia, which is starring Irene Adler. A lot of different types of stories in this as well. Some of them are not even technically crimes, they're more like mysteries. I would strongly recommend the audiobook narrated by Stephen Fry, because it's fantastic. And if you don't already love these stories or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's writing style, because his style is also really fantastic in this collection, then you will probably fall in love, as I did, through this Stephen Fry narration. Lastly, I finished a Swedish nonfiction, which is Krig, Kvinnor och Gud by Beata Arnborg. This is a biography about Barbro Alving, who was a Swedish journalist and writer throughout the 20th century. She worked mostly as a war correspondent and traveling through the world to different parts of the world during the war and during conflict. She also wrote and worked as a journalist for big events like royal coronations and the Olympic Games and other big events like that. So she was very active from, I think, mostly the late 20s up to the 70s. This book follows her life, both her personal life in that she had a lot of affairs, she was bisexual and seemed to be very comfortable with her relationship with both men and women. She had a lot of friends who are famous people both in Sweden and outside of Sweden. But she started working with a lot of different feminist writers and thinkers, and she was really active against nuclear weapons. One of the things that I especially liked in this book was that because she worked throughout most of the 20th century, you get a lot of historical context through her narrative. So while it is a biography about one person, you inevitably get a lot of history from the 1920s and onwards, and see how the war shaped people's lives, both personal lives and more of how the society changed throughout these big events. I really enjoyed this book both for the content and for the form, that I think Beata Arnborg is a really good writer, and I definitely want to read more of her books as well. So those are the books that I read during my vacation and what I read in June. If you've read any of these books, I would love to hear your thoughts about them. As I said, all of my reviews for these books will be linked in the description, if not now, then when they are up. I hope you enjoy this video, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.